So I hope people don't mind. We're going to record this, and that way for people who weren't able to join us, they can access this later. But please, Dorota, do you want to say a few words?
My name is Dorota Ostrowska. I'm a senior lecturer in film and modern media at Birkbeck, University of London, and that's the university that co-organized with Tamara Falikov's University of Kansas this particular event. We were generously supported by Birkbeck in hosting a live version of this event that never happened due to the pandemic, and also with the support of the university we managed to relaunch it in this virtual version. Clearly Birkbeck did not deliver 100% because we had to switch to Zoom, which is provided by the University of Kansas, so we have a real collaboration here going on, the real bridge, and I'm really glad that we found the solution, and apologies for the disruption, and I really hope that you will enjoy the panel nonetheless. And it's wonderful to have everyone here, and a very warm welcome to the panelists and also to our wonderful and supportive audience.
All right, well, I'm going to ask Diana to take the stand, and she'll be moderating, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Dorota. Thanks for having me, everyone. I'm Diana Sanchez. I'm the Senior Director of Film at TIFF. That means I oversee the programming of the festival as well as the Cinematheque. As Tamara said, one of my joys in life was working at the Panama Film Festival, where I was part of the founding team. And I've been working as a programmer, focusing on Spanish, Latin American, Portuguese cinema previously for like 17 years. And now I just oversee the whole thing, but that's very much very, very near and dear to my heart. I'm on day 3 now of the Toronto Film Festival. I was up, it was not late, but I had a conversation last night with Jay Balvin and Matthew Heineman that ended at 10. So it's even though it's virtual, I'm still having long days, which is interesting, and very, very, very different times that we're working in. I'm very excited to speak to the panelists because one of the things that's been really interesting is that how much festivals have been talking about how we're going to move forward in this world. Jonathan, if you could, Jonathan Ali, if you could start, with introducing yourself and giving us some a small synopsis of your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Diana. And I'm thrilled that you're able to join us. It boggles my mind that you're in the middle of TIFF and you are here with us moderating this. So thank you for that. Thank you to Dorota and to Tamara for inviting me to be a part of this. And unfortunately, we can't be together as we were meant to be back in March, but having it now this way has added some opportunities to the event. So for those of you who didn't get the chance to see my presentation, I titled it Carefully Curating the Caribbean. And it's basically about programming the Third Horizon Film Festival, of which I am program director, as a small identity-based or regional survey film festival that that region being the Caribbean, in a city, Miami, that's where the festival takes place, with a top tier or A-list type festival, the Miami Film Festival. We are a sort of hybrid audience industry festival, something I can talk about a bit later when we get into discussion. And we take place over one long weekend. We started out in September, but then we realized that's too close to hurricane season, so we moved the festival to February. We take place over one long weekend at basically one venue with little or no counter programming and no competitive section, and therefore with a focus on, as I said, what I like to call a carefully curated program. Some of my concerns that I went through in the presentation included Third Horizon's position on the festival circuit, filmmaker expectation when it comes to our programming, and the issue of premiere status. And I talked about the fact that previous to Third Horizon, I was a programmer with the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival for 10 years. I was there from its inception to 2015. And I wrote about programming the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival in my master's thesis at Birkbeck. And I positioned that festival, methodologically speaking, as a subaltern counter-public sphere. For those of you who might know what that is. But I'm interested in moving away from that sort of analysis when I'm looking at talking about Third Horizon, because I see us, even though we are a Caribbean festival like Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival and other festivals, I see us having more in common with certain festivals that are more like niche, smaller festivals in the US, like True Falls and Indie Memphis, festivals like that. So yeah, that's basically it. And just briefly, there were no slides in my talk, so if anyone has no idea what our festival looks like, as a bit of branding, we started out as the Third Horizon Caribbean Film Festival. That's our first year's program. Then we significantly dropped the Caribbean, and we just Third Horizon Film Festival, and that's an interesting thing. I can also talk about if that comes up. And then this year, a bit of merch as well. We rebranded because there are different arms to Third Horizon, and we rebranded, and this is our new logo on our T-shirt. This logo actually is a homage to the flag for the Caribbean Federation that never actually happened, but we all hoped would have happened back in the early 60s, but that utopian dream died. But we're trying to keep that dream sort of alive with the festival. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. We'll go to Maria Delgado next.
Hi, Deanna. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Again, thank you, Dorota and Tamara, for the invitation. Hopefully, you have all seen my brief presentation. I came to the London Film Festival as a program advisor, having founded in 1994 the Viva Manchester Film Festival, which is a Spanish film festival which later developed into a Spanish language, so Spanish and Latin American film festival, with some Lusophone work as well. In addition to the London Film Festival, I've also worked as an advisor to the London Spanish Film Festival, and for a brief while also programmed for the London Argentine Film Festival. The London Film Festival, for those of you that don't know, and you have the branding of this year's festival looking very 80s behind me, and partly because I've been recording interviews with filmmakers this week for the festival and using the branding for the Q&As, is the UK's largest film festival. Last year, we had about 220 films, which screened over 12 days. And the festival usually runs in early October. This year, it's from the 7th to the 18th of October, and we announced our program a couple of days ago. Last year we had audiences of about 180,000 attend the festival across a range of different venues in London. The festival has a series of strands. It does usually have a competitive section, first film, best feature film, best documentary, but it's organized also across a series of strands: love, debate, laugh, dare, thrill, cult, journey, create, family, treasures, experimenter. This year, of course, we've all faced the challenge of COVID, and that really was the center of what I was talking about, how we as a group, and for me, a lot of the work I do is very much about a team, working in a team. It's a we. It's about dialogue. It's about collaboration. Dialogue amongst the team that program the festival, dialogue with sales agents, producers, directors, national film agencies, film promotion bodies, other festival directors, other programming teams, dialogue as the absolute core of what we do. So rather than the I of what I do, the we of, and how that we is constituted. And that we also comes together in terms of the relationship with our audiences. It seems really strange for me this year to be undertaking recorded Q&As without an audience in that space, because so much of the way in which that I engage with a filmmaker through a Q&A is in response to the audience's reaction to that film. And it feels really strange this year not to be in that space with the audience as I begin to think through how to structure and frame those Q&As. The big challenge we've had this year is instead of 220 plus films, we've got 58, of which 12 will play in cinemas, and a small number of those 12s will also have virtual screenings. The rest of the program will be virtual. And that's been a big question for us. Again, how do we engage with audiences in that virtual space? What does that mean? And I think that is a new territory for all of us. How does audience participation work for us in the festival? And one of the ways we've rethought audience participation this year is that the official competition juries will be replaced by audience juries. So that's recalibrating, if you like, somewhat the role of the audience in this very different digital space. And just finally, the final thing I guess I touched on is what COVID means. It's very difficult to think about what COVID means to us as film programmers and festival programmers without thinking about what it means for filmmakers. Already this year, we've seen sales agents and producers hold back on films because they want to wait until there's a return to whatever the new normal, in inverted commas, and I use that really very firmly in inverted commas, might be. We know that a lot of films have been delayed. A lot of my conversations with filmmakers have been about work that they can't finish because they're trapped in one country and the post-production was supposed to be in another. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, not just to festivals in this period, but what happens to filmmaking as filmmakers and the industry cope with what COVID means. So I think it's going to create a really interesting space for us, not just next year and the year after, but over the next 5 years, as we begin to think about how festivals are evolving in a COVID and a post-COVID world. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. I've had a lot of similar experiences, so it's very, I totally agree. I did, though, quickly present a film in a cinema the opening night to, I don't know, 10 people. It was pretty emotional. I hadn't seen a film on a screen in so long, and I got teary-eyed on the stage. I was not expecting that, and people were like, they were very appreciative of being able to have that in-cinema experience. Thanks so much. I will ask now Juana Suarez to introduce herself and talk a little bit about her research.
Thank you, Diana. How much time I have?
I would just say 3 minutes. We're just doing intros, but we'll have plenty of time to talk. Just a quick intro about your work.
So thank you so much for the invitation, Tamara and Dorota. My name is Juana Suarez, and I am not a programmer. I am not a curator, but in a way I am. I direct the Moving Image Archiving and Preservation program at NYU. And it's really a media program because we take care from everything that goes from nitrate to virtual reality, artificial reality, with a program that is not specialized on magnetic media or film. We're not orthodox about film. It's really about the moving image. And so I did a small presentation. This is not really my full area of research. Indeed, we had Dina here who heard part of this presentation last year in China. But it's something that I do on the side. And because I don't curate films, I don't really have statistics or a balance to present you. My presentation is a little bit more a call of attention to the role that preservation plays in film festivals. And I think I would start not to repeat what I put in the presentation by saying that I believe that a lot of behaviors that were developed during COVID are going to stay and are not gonna go away after the pandemic. And one of them is for the demand of digital content and programming in digital content. So one of the things that I have to say is that I noticed that there is a handicap, not only in film festivals, but it's also in academia. And the way we are seeing, I am from Colombia, but I have lived in the States for 30 years, is that people usually have a tendency to talk about Latin America, Asia, and Africa, and they put them in a pocket as if they were one single country, or as if we experience exactly the same problems. So when we are talking about a film archive, access, technology, digital content that is available, it's very difficult what a rich Asian country might have versus Ghana or Kenya. Yeah, it's very different what a country might have with a modern, evolving cinematheque that is not the National Film Archive, such as the Cinemateca de Bogotá, versus what a country like Honduras, that just created a film archive 2 years ago, might have available. So I think that something that film festivals can start doing is dissociate and start talking about 3 different continents as if we are just one country. That will be very important for access to content. I also think that I was thinking the other day, looking at the opening and the homage to Tilda Swinton, and a little bit in tandem with what Maria Delgado just said, there was this very beautiful loop about with important filmmakers talking about the theaters and how much we miss cinema. And I keep thinking, what are the theaters that we miss? The corporation ones? Because house art cinemas had really disappeared. We have some surviving in New York that is really minimum to the amount of art cinemas that used to characterize the city, and they are really struggling with the pandemic. They were struggling for the audiences before the pandemic. We don't have many places that had projectors anymore. So I think a good question is, when we say we miss the theater, what is the theater that we are missing? The corporation one with the popcorn and the Coke and the sushi? Or what is the space that we are missing? Because that's a little bit related to the issue of how much film has been preserved and a certain nostalgia for the ability to show films in 16, in 35, when everything is now digital. And then the other thing that I wanted to remark, and I know there will be a space to talk about this, and I have 2 questions that Tamara sent me, is that I heard in the presentation by Hebe, nice to meet you. I had met you at Palm Springs because I was translating for Yaritza Aparicio 2 years ago. But the comment on the Cartagena Film Festival. The Cartagena Film Festival is really very different from what it was 3 or 4 years ago. And when we think on the euphoria, and it's great for that a lot of young people attend film festivals. I think the value of archiving, the value of film preservation, the value of film histories, and the place that it occupies in festivals is that it always has to lead to think you, who were the predecessors of the film festival? How did this film festival look 25 years ago, 30 years ago? Because the Cartagena Film Festival is a great example. When Garcia Marquez was alive, the Cartagena Film Festival used to attract a big film tribe that was around the mythical image of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And so there was a very important person that had a way to curate, and then Monica Wackenberg and the people that followed her, Pedro Adrián Zuluaga, Diana Bustamante, brought another very difficult initiative, a very different initiative to really move curatorship, film programming, the conversations, the guest speakers, etc. And that was not very well received by such a conservative city like the Cartagena, like the local tribe, and also by the film offices. And so we went backwards. Yeah, there has been a retrocess in that film festival. And what I keep seeing throughout all those changes is that film preservation, for example, in the Cartagena, because I had preserved films that are shown there, are shown in mobile inflatable screens that had very bad image. The wind is blowing, you might have a bar with a light red there that they won't turn off, etc. So restorations are very expensive. We had people here like Anastasia, you know that a film restoration can be $25,000, $50,000, $100,000. And then you get to screen it in very bad conditions because it's not central to the film festival, the thinking about preservation. Now, so that's what I have to say. It sounds a little bit energetic, but I think that we have to think a little bit about the role of preservation, because we do not only preserve nitrate, acetate, and polyester. Everything that is born digital needs to be preserved. And that's even more fragile than everything that was analog media.
Thank you, Juana. No, I have so many questions. I know. We'll move along to Anastasia Kerameos. Anastasia,
Hi, yeah,
hi there. So we're asking everyone to just introduce themselves quickly
that's
and
fine.
a brief synopsis. Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you, Diana. Yes, first of all, I'd like to apologize. Thank you very much for having me on the panel in the first place, but I'd like to apologize that you didn't get my video in time. I've been on another conference, which I was the organizer of, and it was a bit hectic, shall we say. So my take is I did do a slide. It's just the one slide. And it didn't have a title, but basically it starts off with, if you collected anything at all relating to film festivals, what would it be and why? Because I think that's a really crucial question. So just a little bit about myself. I am the Serials and E-Resources Librarian at the BFI Rubin Library. I've worked at the BFI for about 30 years. I know I only look 20. And I've always been working at the library, but I've had quite a few different roles within the library, so I know the collection pretty well. And what I wanted to point out is that people's expectations are very high. Libraries are in the business of information, and what we try to do is we collect. So part of that collection is actually selection as part of the acquisition. And we try to provide for the researchers, for our audience's needs, for whatever your needs might be. So we have people who will come in, you'll have filmmakers who come in, say 30 years after their film was shown at the LFF with a mate, and they'll say, oh, you know, my film showed in one of your festivals. I can't remember which one. But, you know, so you go from one extreme to people who want to learn about organizing a festival, you know, journalists who are trying to get information to write their new article. So we're here to cover every information need, in theory. And part of the main points I wanted to make was, A, that libraries are libraries. We do have some unpublished materials, but on the whole, libraries are supposed to only collect published materials. So we're different from archives. The BFI has an archive, and the archive does have some items in the collection, but it may not be a priority to them to specifically collect festival materials. But again, that is their area of work, not mine. And equally with the film archive, that is a separate part of the BFI. So this is an issue we have quite often, that people say, oh, you work at the BFI, you must work with film. No, I don't. Actually, I work with print publications on the whole, and obviously being e-resources librarian with electronic and digital publications. So selection and acquisition depends very much on who the host organization is, who the audience is, and the audience expectations. So I'll say that word again, expectations, I think are quite important. Everybody thinks that, well, surely it should all be digital, it should be online for free, you know, easy to access, and that's not the case, because there is such a little word as resources, which are not easily found. So the other point from my presentation, for those who wouldn't have seen it, and that'll be everybody because I didn't get to share it quickly enough, is about cataloging of our collections. So again, archival cataloging and library cataloging are quite different. The conference I was just at, we are looking very much into open data, linked data, how we can get library catalogs open to others. So we were looking at things like Wikidata, where, you know, which feeds Wikipedia, and then Wikipedia feeds Google. So making your data available. And one of the problems that I have when collecting is people who are in the festival circuit are in the festival circuit. So you have your contacts, you have your connections, you know what the important festivals are to you, which filmmakers are likely to approach what. People who work in libraries are not in that circuit. So it's quite difficult for us to actually gather this information. So we're in the business of helping give out information or point people to the correct place to get the information, but it is actually quite difficult for us to find that information sometimes. And I wanted to applaud festivals who are actually starting to consider archiving the information that they create. So some of the major festivals are really good at this. They have an archive online, so they keep not just their catalogs, but they keep the videos of interviews that they've done and so on, and they stay there. That's the important thing with online. Online doesn't survive forever. You have no control, and that's why libraries and archives collect, because you have no control over what somebody else keeps online. And with things becoming born digital, we need to actually come into some agreement with festivals and other producers that says, yes, you have permission to actually save this onto your drives and make it accessible to other people for forever, hopefully. So that was pretty much it.
Thank you, Anastasia. Hebe, you are next. Welcome. I haven't seen you in a while. It's good to see you here.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Diana. And thank you, Tamara and Dorota, for inviting me to be part of this. So I come from a little bit of a different side of the business because I'm a filmmaker, and I became a curator or programmer a little bit by chance, but then really as a passion choice. I hail from Argentina, but I've been living in the United States for the last 20 years. And since I started getting involved in programming, curating, I work most of the time for several festivals, at the same time producing a couple of those. I work for Sundance Film Festival, Los Angeles Film Festival. I've been working for Palm Springs International Film Festival, Seattle International, artistic director of Cine Latino Minneapolis, and I'm part of the Cartagena Film Festival for the last 2 years. I wasn't thinking really when I was doing my presentation that it was going to be like, you know, the core of my presentation. But since it's been my experience, the fact that I always work with different festivals and different audiences, and even different, a little bit of scope of the festivals. I always seen myself as a bridge, especially because I was coming from, Argentina, being Latina, being, part of a culture that I really wanted to be sort of an ambassador. I became, almost, naturally an advocate for all those voices that I felt needed to be heard. And in hearing all these beautiful presentations, there are a couple of things that really stand out for me. One of the first ones is the word dialogue that Maria repeated so many times. And I love that word because I think that's really what we're doing here. In the midst of this global COVID pandemic and these reeling economies and this massive social and political and racial unrest and uprising, the only we can do collectively, each of us in our different positions, is try to, hold our ground and, sort of give us this sort of connection and remind us that we're all human and that we're connected. And we need those stories that we, in different positions and, throughout this industry, make sure that, reach the audience, whether it's, just a general audience or a scholarly audience, students, etc. And I think this is the moment where each of us means, have such a pivotal role in keeping us human, connected. And it's weird to say this when we are through, a platform, but at the same time, I just see the possibilities that this is bringing to all of us. First, being together. Maybe we haven't, if it weren't for this opportunities, maybe we didn't even meet some people. I'm so thrilled to meet Anastasia today. She, you know, I probably never would have crossed paths with her. And one of the things you said, Anastasia, which is, you know, hey, you know, you are producing a lot of material that we would love to have access to. It's, you know, it's great to hear that, because I always say the only thing that is left after years, especially like a whole year of preparing a festival, is the photos or the audiovisual, you know, materials that we, you know, produce during the festival, if we are able to do that. So anyway, I know this might not be like a super focused presentation. I just want to say that for me, this is, you know, a time that opens doors. And, you know, going straight into just very quickly, for me, this year was a very heart-wrenching experience. Palm Springs Film Festival happened in January. It went without a glitch. It was beautiful. It was audiences everywhere. It was fun. Then came Cartagena. It was cut short in the middle of the festival. Everything was suspended. We had almost everything ready to start booking talent for Seattle International Film Festival. That one was canceled altogether. So my, you know, emotional life was just like a I don't know, ups and downs all the time. But then now I have this opportunity of, right now we've been working for the virtual edition of Cine Latino Minneapolis St. Paul. And I'm just going to say this, one of the things that, and going back into something that everybody mentioned, and especially in the case of, you know, Maria and Jonathan, how much the audiences need to be listened to, and how much we have to make sure that we get to them. And this is the opportunity I think we have with the virtual world. In the case of Cine Latino, the virtual world is giving us this special chance of actually, and we call it this year, Cine Latino at home. We're making that extra effort to make sure that our presence and our programming and everything we do is getting to those places that maybe before, just because you know you have a theater and you're expecting people to come to you, you know, not that we don't care, it's just that, you know, we believe that people will come. But this year we have to do that extra effort to make sure that we go to them and we create other opportunities also for people to interact. So this is, you know, a little bit of the general presentation. And for me, one of the beauties of working for different festivals is really sort of listening carefully to those different, the nuances of the different audiences and who is going and why and what kind of films they like. And I always say, sometimes you know, collectively you present a film that maybe a couple of people love, but those people who come to you and say at the end of a screening, I know nobody else liked this film, but thank you for bringing this film to the festival. Those are the moments we are all, you know, sort of working for. And I think, again, this is the moment where we might be isolated because of COVID, but I think at the same time is a moment where we can be really, you know, and I see this because it's happening, working, you know, in a way we never worked before. It really, to me, opened opportunities like never before.
Well, thanks, Hebe. Do you mean having like this digital world, like this digital element that we've added? Is that those are the opportunities you're talking about?
I am talking about opportunities to reach audiences we never reached to. I'm talking about collaborations that you've never seen before, not only among, you know, us, you know, the group that we're here, but you see collaborations on the big festivals, on organizations that maybe didn't have that much connection before, but because of, you know, this possibility of the digital connection, now you see working together. Collaborations between people who are, you know, in the producing of the films. There are collectives being created like by the minute. There are so many new initiatives that are putting people together and connecting. I am mesmerized by the flourishing of activity that it's connecting things. And I always thought that we were working, all of us, in each in their sort of organization or side of the industry. And I always felt that there was, you know, so much synergy that was lost because we didn't know each other, or because we didn't have the opportunity. And I think, again, COVID is giving us this very rare opportunity to actually use that synergy.
Yeah, it really has. I mean, I've spent the summer talking with all the fall film festivals in Canada to make sure that we were able to collaborate, and looking at digital capacities and discussing everything from, you know, not having a festival to only online to hybrid festivals. So it has been very collaborative, which has been nice. I'm going to ask Jonathan and Maria to talk a little bit about how your festivals have pivoted now to the new COVID reality. What you think the future might be? Is it bleak? What are the silver linings?
Shall I start? Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. We held this year's Third Horizon in February. It was the first year we moved we had moved to February, and the festival came off in early February. When I flew in to Miami from London, where I'm based, I was asked a couple of questions about whether or not I'd traveled to Wuhan, and that was my first inkling that something, you know, was coming. But, you know, I mean, once I got to Miami, the festival, you know, came off without a glitch, and there was no inkling then that, you know, of what was to come. And then some members of my Third Horizon team went to Berlin, because Third Horizon is also a filmmaking collective as well as a film festival, and we had a short in competition that won the Golden Bear. And that was the last film festival, right? You know, everything shut down after that. So, you know, we sort of started thinking about, you know, well, what next, you know, after a suitable sort of period of just, you know, trying to catch ourselves. We held a couple of virtual events over the summer, where we partnered with filmmakers one who had a film that had premiered at Third Horizon, and we wanted to have another screening of it, because we wanted to present it to Caribbean audiences as well. So this is one of the opportunities we got, which is that by presenting virtually, as a Caribbean festival based in Miami, we could also present to the Caribbean, to audiences in the Caribbean, to see work that sometimes they might not otherwise get to see, because either the festivals there aren't playing this work, or some of the islands don't have film festivals, and they don't have you know, ways of getting this kind of work in independent cinema screened. And then we did a second screening of a documentary that had just been selected to premiere, a Caribbean documentary, Puerto Rico film, to premiere at Tribeca and Hot Docs. And of course, those happened virtually, but, you know, the in-person events didn't happen. And the filmmaker was sorely disappointed, you know, to not be able to get the reap the rewards of having it presented that way in person. So she wanted to do virtual events. So we teamed up with her to do a virtual event, which was great because it was an event, you know, with a lot of people in the US, but people in Puerto Rico as well. And we did that, and that was great. So we're thinking now of next year's festival and what, you know, we're planning next year's event. We may decide, we're talking about, you know, for one edition, moving the dates just a bit further down to give us more breathing room to sort of, fully work out, things that need to be worked out, because right now there's still a big question mark over Miami in particular, in terms of COVID and what's happening there, and the US in general in terms of what's happening there politically. But we're definitely thinking that whatever happens in terms of being able to hold an in-person event, we are going to have a virtual component, and that's going to be something we're very much looking forward to, and we've been seeing what everyone else has been doing. And again, it's going to be a great opportunity to be able to screen work not only in the US, but we're thinking, we're going to also make this work available to Caribbean audiences, because again, so much of this work just isn't getting screened there. So, obvious drawbacks. I haven't been to a cinema since March. It's been so long, and we all want to be back in the cinemas. So as much as we can, we will do that. But where we can't, we will try to utilize the opportunities that virtual screenings afford us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That really helps to reflect on audiences now in different ways. And just thinking, some people that for whatever reason are vulnerable and can't get to a cinema, and the opportunities that a virtual a film festival allows, or if it's too far a drive, or it's too expensive, for example. There's a lot of different reasons that people can't. For example, TIFF is, there's usually big lineups, and some people might not want to do that, but still want to experience international cinema. So that's that for us as well. It's been really, really great to see. Maria, how have you pivoted, and how do you see this? Do you see this as like something positive, silver linings in this whole experience?
Thanks, Deanna. I mean, I think some of the things that Jonathan said and what you've just been talking about really echoes. I think it's one of those things, isn't it, that as COVID, those early months of COVID when you were thinking through, nobody really knew what it was going to mean. So there was a lot of kind of having to think through quite early on with so much that you could just not be sure about. When COVID first really hit the UK in late February, early March, people were talking about a return to, in inverted commas, normality by the autumn. And the autumn is when the LFF happens. And already I think we were beginning to see that really wouldn't be the case without having real clarity about what that future might be. I think one of the things, and I'm going to try and fold in the two questions that David and Thomas have asked online into the answer here, is that we were just watching films, not knowing whether we would have a live festival or whether it was going to be some sort of digital event of some sort, until about May, when Tricia Tuttle, who's a festival director, with the core festival team, had been undertaking a number of modelings of what the festival might look like. And they were presented to the whole programming and program advisor team in May and June for discussion. And they were already pretty advanced by the time that they were presented to all of us. But I think one of the things that was really important for Tricia was the idea of getting back into cinemas. And she used that term when announcing the new format for the festival. And I think she knew that it wouldn't be possible to have the whole festival in cinemas, closer to the model that Rebordino has for San Sebastian this year, but she wanted to have a cinematic presence for the festival. I think going back to the idea of opportunity, we have had festival screenings outside London before, but this year there's a real sense in which there's been a discussion from quite an early planning stage with cinemas, independent cinemas across the UK. I think that's really positive. I think that the opportunity for reaching a broader audience and a non-London based UK audience is also greater. And I think, I'd be answering the question in a very different way in a month's time when the festival is midway or almost finished. And I think that will be the time when we really reassess what's worked, what hasn't, what would we do differently if we were in a similar situation next year. David asked about the pre-recorded interviews. I think for me, the issue of the virtual, I'm thinking a lot about how you engage with audiences in that space, because there is something about the live Q&A, about being in that space with an audience, about shaping that Q&A to how that audience has responded to the films, which is so very, very important. I never wholly plan a Q&A, not even a masterclass, a 90-minute masterclass, because for me, the relationship to the audience is fundamental to how you moderate that encounter. You are all in that space, and it's extraordinary what the audience, the ways the audience engage through and in that encounter. This year, as I said, they're pre-recorded. The ways in which I've tried to think about audience responses is to talk to the filmmakers beforehand, talk to colleagues who've programmed the films in other festivals. So, for example, last week I undertook a Q&A with Francisco Marquez, the director of A Common Crime, which premiered in Berlin. And I had spoken to Ana David, who'd programmed it in Berlin, to talk about the audience response there, and to actress Elisa Carricajo, who'd been there as part of the Q&As. So actually it was quite useful in giving me a broader context. That's not to say that's the way an LFF audience would respond to it, but it gives me a different kind of context. And I suppose this also goes back to the idea of, how, programming to an extent is always a matter of taste, but it's also about responsibility. Yes, it's about how a story or a film may resonate with you, but I think it's also about thinking through your own unconscious bias as a programmer towards particular kinds of films, particular kinds of filmmakers, and thinking about as bringing in as broad an audience as you can, recognizing a film for its own merits, which might not tally with your own personal taste. And there's an element of that in thinking through the kinds of questions that might come from audiences that might not necessarily be the questions you would ask. And I suppose that's been the thing I've been most thinking through in the ways I've been organising my Q&As with filmmakers this year. But at the heart of it, I think, has been dialogue. Again, the dialogue with a filmmaker before and planning through the Q&A, seeing if there's anything in particular they'd like to talk about, and then using that as the springboard when the conversation's recorded.
Yeah, and to those live Q&As and the issues facing them, some of them are technical, some of them are time zones as well. And it's just, it's a heavy lift for the team that's already working under difficult circumstances during COVID. There's just so many things you have to worry about: turnaround time in the cinemas, the choreograph, the entrance and exit of audiences. It's completely different. So adding an extra layer of also having that same team organize a Q&A, a live Q&A with a Q&A is quite, it's just an extra lift.
Safety, I mean, we haven't talked about it, but audience safety, filmmaker safety, everybody's safety is absolutely at the core of how festivals are being rethought at the moment. It has to be, it absolutely has to be.
Yeah, no, there's audience safety, and then also from the side of the virtual part, the film safety, where the piracy concerns, like there's so many layers that are added to this. Yeah. Anastasia, I have a question about, I'm just really interested in this idea of the importance of archiving all the materials that we produce. I do agree. The thing is, that's a whole team. Like that means that's a lot of people that are working not just to archive it, but to content capture. So we've gotten into these issues, at TIFF and other festivals I've worked at. It's like, how much do you dedicate to, how much do you capture? What about the ephemeral magic of a film festival? It's kind of like you have to be at some things. I don't know, how do you navigate that? Because it's not just like you've got this material and no one has to work. It's a lot of work to like capture it, produce it, and then going and finding it later when you need it is a whole other story.
Yes, it is a lot of work, and that is what we do. we try to get the information from whatever source we can and put it out in a way that's available to everyone. One thing I would say, there's different types of information. So for the festival catalogues, so for the BFI library, for example, our collection started back in the 30s. So it started with the really early festivals when festivals first started. And the idea then was to try and collect as much of the kind of published material. So it would include, as Juana was saying, press cuttings, magazines, articles about it, the catalogues themselves, programs. The archive actually has a slightly different role in that, and things which I think are of interest to researchers, which are things that you can't capture so easily. So, for example, you might have the interviews, or maybe there's an oral history where the people who do the programming actually talk about that year, or there's the documents from the programming team that went through all their reasonings, why they chose some things. And that's one thing I think to pick up from the conversation earlier of what's important is, in this COVID year, which were the films that missed out? You know, I mean, this came up in the previous event that you held, and I think it should be repeated here, that it's really important to know which are the films that missed out, because we can document the films that were shown in the festivals to some extent, but we can't really say much about the ones that missed out. And although that's information that's sensitive at the moment, I think an archive's role is really important to hold that information so that in the future, whenever that's, you know, whether it's 50 years, 70 years, whenever it is, it can become available. So I probably haven't answered your question, but Juana?
No, I think that's that's definitely related. I was wondering, Juana, if you had any thoughts on that. It's just the consideration of the.
Yeah. No, I think I am. Thank you, Diana. I think I'm totally on with Anastasia saying, and I think a little bit too. I agree with you that this should be everybody's work to preserve the memory of a festival. We all should have some investment in that, but we can also not forget that archiving is a profession. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to let people do their job. Either people that are coming from training in archiving or people that are coming from information sciences. And I think that there was a question that Tamara sent to me about if the film festivals have their archives organized, etc. I don't really have a census like across the globe. There are way too many film festivals. We tend to concentrate on the big ones. That's why I started my presentation also mentioning the big ones in Latin America, but not forgetting that there are also mid-sized and small festivals and a lot of emerging initiatives that are also important. I think that one of the things that we want to think is that archival processes are very expensive. They demand technology and they demand human resources that need to be trained, and because technologies change so fast and change every day, the training for human resources also has to be continuous, and that's very expensive. So I think that when people budget for a film festival, hardly people budget for what is going to be the cost of archiving the film festival. And somebody was asking, the person who was asking me this question of if archives, yeah, there are film festivals that have very organized archives, but I would say that, I mean, it will be a whole different lecture to give advice, but I would say that film festivals, if you are expecting that you are going to be able to organize 40 years of history, or 30 years of history, or 15, it's a little bit what happens with your personal archive. You keep thinking, one of these days, I'm gonna take on all these boxes and digitize them and catalog, and that never happens. So what you really have to do is to set a strategy that you say, from now on, we'll start to archive our festival, starting 2020, which is really like a very emblematic year. And then little by little, you bring boxes and materials and films from the past and you start upgrading to a system that you created to start getting organized. But then there is another thing that is very much neglected in film festival archives that I have seen, is that when we have participants that are going to be in Q&A, filmmakers, producers, actors, when we do roundtables, when we do Q&A, in many cases, we ask people to sign releases that they are going to be recorded. We ask people to sign releases that this is going to go somewhere else. We forget to ask people to give release to be part of the archive and to allow their image to be susceptible to the changes of technology and forthcoming technologies. So we have a lot of materials from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that at the end of the day end up being educational value that you have to consult in situ, because it's like documentaries. Nobody bothered at the moment to ask people on how this is going to be changing with technology. So we see gifts from film festivals. And of course, Maria is right. Once it's online, once you are online, I can become a meme from this presentation. I can become a GIF from this presentation. So, because we also work with people that are very aware or that make so much money from their personal image. We also have the responsibility to take care of that image in addition to stewarding a collection. Not because we are invested in the public persona, but because we are signing copyright legal contracts that are important. So I would say that that's very important. We just cannot forget that archiving is a profession and there are people that are trained for that. Those systems are expensive. The granularity of a catalog in which Anastasia is insisting, the mining of data, is very expensive. And that's, I mean, this is not original thought. Everybody that is working on data now knows that data is the new oil. Now, how that data is handled brings a lot of money. Somebody mentioned Google. Somebody mentioned Google in the conversation today.
That was me.
So how that information goes there, it has a price. It's valuable information. But film festivals can also capitalize their archives, having very good archives and access for researchers. Because I think that's the other thing, that a lot of people, we're going to be doing a homage to Gutierrez Alea. And they decide that 2 months ahead, the film festival, and they get infuriated because the ICAIC is not giving them access. They have not restored the films of Gutierrez Alea. What are Latin Americans thinking? Well, this is what Latin Americans are thinking. Let's talk about Argentina. The budget of the Museo del Cine that had the copy of Metrópoli, that has a film of Buster Keaton, their budget for a year is around $50,000. At this moment, they are telling them that they have to move again. We had paid for restorations $75,000. So it means that there are archives that do not even have money to take care of their assets, and we are expecting them to have everything digitized. And I think that there are a lot of international institutions that are digitizing films. And when somebody was asking me about colonization, the dependency of technology historically has supported the colonial order. And because we cannot have scanners in Latin America because they are very expensive. An ARRI scanner is around $140,000. Now, we always have to be depending on what other institutions want to preserve for us. And although we are grateful, at the end of the day, is the taste of a particular person or a particular institution what gets to be preserved.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the challenge, and there does have to be a strategy. Especially, for example, at TIFF, say we do 600 Q&As each festival. You just don't have the manpower to go and capture all of those, and then what do you do with a lot of that? So that's something that every year we're grappling with. This year is very different. They're all pre-recorded, so we have them and they're canned. But yeah, this is a very, very different year.
So can I just say, sorry, this is what my point was from my slide, which obviously nobody saw, about the importance, because you start with selection. What do you select? And these are the questions that librarians and archivists are, this is what we're trained to think about. And what it starts with, what do you select, who are you selecting it for, and then obviously the resources you have to deal with it. And we very, very much would like to be able to be there for the festivals, for the organizations, and for the audience that comes to the festivals. And maybe in this day and age, I mean, maybe we can take advantage of people out there, people who are not librarians, not festival organizers, but who perhaps have the time and the interest and the inclination to work on projects like this. So when I mentioned Wikidata and Wikipedia, the other thing that concerns me is, as Juana's saying, is it's a case of money. You get, you know, people who take advantage, and you get people like us who actually want to be open. And it's a real dilemma in my profession at the moment, because of course we want to make all our information open as much as possible, but we don't really want somebody else to be making money off it when we are starved of resources ourselves. So it's a real dilemma.
I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I want to say, it might be the last thing that I say. I also think that something that worries me as a person that I consider myself an archivist activist, is the little lobby that happens at the level of film festivals in the support for film archives. I'll give the most salient example right now, the Brazilian Cinematheque in Sao Paulo, which is a gemstone to the world. Brazilian cinema has been so enlightening for conversations around the world. It's such an important history. I mean, we have films like Límite, we had the filmography of Nelson Pereira dos Santos, we have scripts, posters, photographies. It was directed for many years by Paulo Emilio Sales, a translation of his book was just done by Maite Conde in England last year. And the Cinematheque has been really battled and challenged by political problems, by the current government, the disappearance of the Ministry of Culture, the stop of payment of salaries to the staff. There is nitrate there that is abandoned at this moment. I don't know how many of you had visited the place. It used to be a slaughterhouse. It's a very beautiful facility. It used to be the dean of cinematheques in Latin America, and it's totally stalled. Their employees are suffering the loss, and the audiovisual patrimony is suffering the absence of caretaking. I had barely seen any film festival lobbying for attention, international attention to the very dramatic case of the Brazilian Cinematheque. And that, I really find disheartening, that people will expect to have their Brazilian films like right off the shelf for when they are doing curator and programming, but we are not doing advocacy for these places.
Yes, thank you, Juana. And someone, Katja, is saying thank you for mentioning this excruciating situation of the Sao Paulo Cinematheque. It's very, very important.
I would like to say regarding this thing about preserving the memory, and it's a problem we've been having for many, many years. When Alex Lab closed in Buenos Aires many years ago, all of the films, some of them, the only copies in existence were just put out there for as garbage. I had the opportunity to do a little focus on Leopoldo Torre Nilsson's a few years back. It was painstakingly it was almost impossible to do it because there was nothing, not even his own relatives had photos of him to provide for this retrospective. So, and I've been saying this in other forums because I think when I hear Juana saying, what's going on with the Cinematheque in Brazil, but what's going on in Museo del Cine in Argentina, etc. It also goes together with the overall the policies and the general cultural idea that they have, because the preservation of memory and the, you know, this cultural wealth that we're all talking about, going also into how much of, you know, the audiovisual byproducts of, for example, festivals, but I can say the same thing for dance and music and many other activities that are not being archived because of, you know, financial constraints. And this all goes into the overall idea of what we have of, you know, culture as a big thing. And we cannot separate, and I, you know, even though I, of course, for me, film is my passion, there is a lot of other things we need to, you know, put in this conversation. And of course, goes back to politics, who we're voting for, who is behind these laws that really give access, like, you know, talking about film, you know, we're talking about audiences. How much effort, we're talking about preserving memory, how much effort are we doing to create new audiences? How much we need to include film, dance, music, every form of artistic expression in kindergartens, in schools, in high schools, in colleges. Because when we start seeing the disconnect and this thing that sometimes people do not know what we're doing, or these organizations that are starving for money, because the audience we're all talking about, sometimes they don't know anything about this. And they don't know because they haven't grown up into understanding the value of this. Hence, you know, it's a bigger conversation, and I really cherish this opportunity where we are all from, again, different parts of the world and different parts of this business, trying to think new ways of approaching all this in a way where all our little efforts and our financial sort of resources can be put together. And maybe, and I hear you, Anastasia, and I said, hey, this is a brilliant idea. Why don't I, as a film festival, maybe get in contact with you or someone you can, you know, get me in contact with to help me create those materials that we are producing, but maybe we don't have, you know, those resources or knowledge of how to do it. And I never thought about that. And I think this is a, you know, the amazing thing about what we were saying and doing right now in this, you know, conference. Suddenly I have this brilliant opportunity of maybe partnering with people and organizations like yours to try help us preserve that memory that we're building all the time. And I'm going to finish by saying this. One of my first gigs when I arrived in LA was actually organizing a sort of the archive of the American Cinematheque. They had hundreds, thousands of photos and material just in drawers with, like, nobody knew what was there. I never organized an archive before, but I'm a producer. So I started this project as, anybody who's trying to find out a way of doing it. And I started from the present. I started to archive, moving forward, and then slowly going backwards. Now they have this, I know they have an archive and they're using it, but this is just one organization. And of course, there is never resources. And this is a battle that we all have to fight every day. I always say when I explain why we need to do this is, I compare festivals or any of these cultural events as a wedding. The only thing you have when, everything is passed is those beautiful pictures in an album and maybe a video. So why are we not doing that with, all these other festivals? But again, going back to cultural policies, this is where we should be sitting down and starting actually drafting new ideas, new laws on how to create this synergy between all of us to make sure that this memory, this, you know, this wealth is preserved, but also that the audience that needs to know about it from the very beginning is there too.
Yeah, I agree. And I loved earlier when Juana said 2020, we can take this year and start reflecting on these and, you know, start the archive again. I think I think this COVID period has really given us that time to reflect on how to move forward. I think we only have a couple of minutes left.
Well, actually, sorry, Diana, I just want to interject because we got started late. If people are okay with it, I'd like to go an extra 15 minutes because I think I don't want to give this panel short shrift because of technical problems. If people have to leave, we totally understand. If panelists have to leave, totally understand. But I would like to end in 15 minutes just because there are lots of questions in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a few. Yes, I have a few that I can get to now then, because we were talking about working for different film festivals and, you know, how film festivals directors feel about that and the difference. How do you curate for different film festivals? And I think Jonathan and Hebe, you both do work for various film festivals. Jonathan, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, as I said, I'm based in the UK. Third Horizon is in Miami. And Diana, this is something you would know about, being based in one place and, you know, programming a festival that's happening elsewhere. I came on board with Third Horizon in 2016, which was a transitional year for me because I left the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival at the end of 2015 and I moved to the UK in 2016. And in between leaving Trinidad and establishing myself in London, I was invited to join the Third Horizon team. But, you know, had that not happened, my intention would have been, and it still is, of course, you know, to be a part of the film industry in the UK. And so I work here for festivals here. I'm currently a programmer with the Alchemy Experimental Festival in Scotland. I was a programmer for the Open City Docs Fest, which is currently happening right now in London. So I'm doing work here as well as doing work with Third Horizon. I am the Third Horizon director, so that's a position is, you know, I'm full-time in that sense with the festival, but I don't have a full-time contract. You know, so I do, you know, have the need to do work with other festivals. This is my livelihood. So I do that. You know, I'm upfront with all the festivals that I work, you know, for and with, you know, all my commitments. And I've never had any issues with any of the festivals I've worked with. I mean, in fact, you know, there've been some synergies, being able to program something in one festival and then being invited by another festival that I work for to bring those films there. So, you know, our opening night selection of films in Miami this year, which were a trio of Haitian documentaries, we programmed them at Open City in association with Third Horizon, and those are playing right now and having their European premiere at Open City. So, you know, I've managed to make it work for me in terms of the workload and in terms of, you know, keeping all the festivals I work with satisfied.
I'm going to be very quick. I had a little bit of obstacles at the very beginning. There was a little bit of jealousy or, you know, whatever between, you know, some of the festivals. But I haven't had any problems since. Of course, I take good care of the fact of not overlapping, you know, festivals that I work with. But one of the things that actually gave me is really the opportunity to actually feature many more films. One of the things that happened, especially being normally focusing on Latin American cinema, Ibero cinema, etc., is the fact that for many years I will have just a number of films that I was able to program in one place or the other, and having the opportunity to work for several festivals really for me was like the opportunity to show more films, and I know there are so many more that I can, but still, you know, now those, you know, spots are opening. But the other thing for me is I love the fact that through working with different festivals, I'm able to know different audiences. And in the case, and to me it's fascinating, and I work for Guadalajara, through Guadalajara in Los Angeles, which I directed for 3 years, or I was part of the board of directors of a film, dance film festival for many years too, is, you know, you get to know audiences and people in a way that, you know, I never worked for just one festival. So I really, by now, I don't know what that means. And it's beautiful. It's challenging. It's really challenging, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Just, I love just listening to people when they get out of a cinema and hearing what they say, for good or for worse. And it's really fascinating. I love the human connection, and this fact of being able to program for different festivals. Of course, I'm not full-time, and that's, you know, a blessing, and a, you know, and not a blessing, because of course I don't have that security, but it gives this, you know, plasticity that working for several festivals provides. And you know, and now again, I think because of COVID, again, the opportunity to even collaborate more. I haven't started really. I mean, like, I've seen collaborations before, like for example, Dance Camera West collaborated with Los Angeles Film Festival, presenting dance alongs in an open air space in LA a few years back. But I can see that happening more and more. So.
If I could just interject for a second, because both Hebe and Jonathan have brought up a really important issue, which was brought up yesterday as well, and that's about the precarity of seasonal programmers and their job stability. And I think that it's something that we have to take very seriously, and we've spoken about policy changes. So I just want to make a plug, as I did yesterday, for the Programmers of Color Collective. And I believe Jonathan and Hebe are already involved with this group, but for folks who have not heard about them, I wanted to pull up the Facebook page on our chat, but since I'm recording, I can't do that without, you know, sharing my screen or something. But please check them out. The Programmers of Color Collective. It's a group of senior programmers and others who want to try to create some kind of a unionized structure for programmers, so that it isn't so unstable, and it's going to exclude people who just cannot even conceive of the idea of being a programmer. And so I just wanted to mention that.
Yes, thank you, Tamara, because in fact, is their efforts also on diversifying and making sure that every festival has access, actually through diversifying their programming teams, and also access to, you know, as consultants or, you know, similar to those films that, you know, many festivals say, hey, I don't know how to get a great African film, or I don't know, Namibian film, or South American or Asian. They're trying to correct that mistake or obstacle by actually making sure that, you know, all these programmers around the world can be reached, and those films and stories that need to be seen and heard can be actually accessed. So it's both. It's, you know, the unionizing and protecting the work we do, which, you know, definitely it's precarious. And we are normally the first ones to sort of fall when, you know, a festival reduces their staff. Is like, well, you know, anybody in a way, oh, we can select films somehow. So it's tough sometimes to defend what we do, even though, you know, we know it's important. But on the other hand, the Programmers Collective, it's really working on making sure that the content, you know, it's interesting that the Academy now realizes, you know, this whole idea of diversity, etc. But this has been always there. It's, you know, it's the world is full of that. It's just, you know, in the case of the collective, is making sure that festivals and organizations are able to actually tap into that diversity.
No, it is a very good point. We ourselves at TIFF, I mean, I was a programmer for 17 years before I started working full time. And when COVID happened, we kept all our programmers on. Their voices are so important. Even though they're not full-time staff, like some of them have been there, you know, for 15 years. So they are, yeah, it's really, it's difficult. At the same time, I have to say I enjoyed the flexibility of working for several festivals, but I also do like the stability, obviously, of working at TIFF in this capacity right now. So those.
Diana, I wonder if it goes back to that idea also of teams and conversations and collaborations, that I think for a long time, the figure that represents a festival has often been a white man. And we're beginning, you know, the whole, I think, of programming and curating is based on conversations, is based on dialogue, is based on acknowledging you cannot know everything. You don't know everything. So where is the curiosity? Who do you need to have conversations with to have the best program possible? And I think it's about being really clear about what you don't know and where you need to go to find out more. And it's about, I mean, we're a very large team of program advisors at LFF. We've always been a very large team. And one of the things that people often say is, you know, how do you program when there's, 20 odd of you are having those kinds of conversations? But I think that's fundamental. It's really, really important. And it's through that dialogue that you begin to think about what the flavor or the look of that year's festival is going to be.
How were your conversations this year, Maria? Were they like very, I mean, for us, they were very different. And there were a lot more conversation actually, because we were fewer films and lots of programmers. How did it work for you?
Yeah, I mean, we had virtual conversations. We usually meet monthly. We have monthly kind of programming meetings, but beyond that, all of us who are program advisors also liaise with one of the full-time programmers on the festival. So, and there's lots of kind of axes of conversation. So, we will meet together monthly, but also there'll be conversations in terms of the strand programmers. So we have programmers for the strands for thrill or love, or as well as the kind of regional program advisors. So there's lots of conversations in the kind of space where we're all together, but also in terms of, email or phone conversations as we begin to think through what we've seen, what we want to put forward. And I think it's, it has been different because we haven't met in person. Also, this is the first time ever I've not seen a lot of the films that I will see will be sent into the BFI and we watch them, groups of 2 or 3 of us, and we've not had that kind of, that opportunity this year. But I think it's about, I think that, it's about finding the challenges are about finding ways of working that are effective and that permit that dialogue and enable those conversations. And it's happened in all aspects of life. We've had to adapt to what COVID has brought us. And we're now thinking of how we take that with us to create a more equitable and better world as we begin to emerge with whatever post-COVID is going to look like. Because I think, COVID is one of the things we've talked about, but there's a whole series of other challenges that we're facing in terms of the world at the moment. Juana and Hebe have talked about Cinematheque starved of funds, and the political agenda of leaders having a dreadful effect on culture and funding for culture and support for culture. And and in that context, we need to think through how we create a more equitable world and the ways in which culture is a fundamental part of that. It's part of our humanity. The ways in which we think about film and film is, you know, a manifestation of what it means to be human. So I think there are important questions that we're asking, not just about COVID, but about the kind of, you know, the ways in which film festivals are portals and windows to the world, and capture a particular moment in history. And we are living through a particularly problematic and challenging moment in history, and how festivals are representing that moment, I think is really, really important.
I'd like to jump in here if I could.
I wanted to say something also.
Okay,
well,
that sounds good. We have, let's do 1 minute each, just to, you know, respect people's time. I know Deanna has to go actually pretty soon. So let's have Jonathan and then Juana for the last word.
Okay, sure. And I just wanted to make a point about programming, given, you know, because my experience with Third Horizon is fairly different to what Maria's would be with LFF, and Diana's would be, and Hebe's would be with their festivals. Our festival being so small, and someone had actually asked this question in the chat. We have a core team of 3. There are 2 co-executive directors of the festival, and I am the programming director. I'm the only person in the team who actually has programmer as a title. And the 3 of us, we all discuss the films together. We have an open call, and anyone in the wider team is also able to bring films to the table. But I do most of the scouting myself, and I have essentially final word on what the program looks like. And I strongly believe that with a smaller festival like ours, a firm curatorial hand is a good thing. And I've really sort of, you know, given, I think, the program at the Festival of Character, especially in the past few years, given what's been happening politically. The festival is a Caribbean festival, but it happens in the US. And we don't want to be blind to what has been happening in the US politically and what is happening in the US. And so I have, you know, been very conscious of my programming reflecting that.
Thank you. I wanted to say, because I had a couple of questions, one through email and another one in the chat, that I won't be able to address about the colonizing the archive. That's a really multi-layer, that's like a whole MA, PhD, postgraduate conversation included. But I did wanted to say that I also, in that frame of dialogue and what COVID is making possible, how we are making milkshake from these strawberries that were given to us. I think it's also important for programmers, and it will be another invitation. I think that part of the colonizing the archive is doing another way of crowdsourcing and finding your human resources for your festivals and your conversations, and finding and looking at other kind of resources for your programming. I am going to be very specific to take advantage of the 35 seconds I had left. I will speak for the case of Colombia, because I am not only an archivist, I am also a film scholar. Constantly, I get requested information on only one filmmaker from Colombia. And even though he's a person that I respect a lot, he's no longer among us. He was not the only filmmaker in Colombia in the 70s and the 80s, yeah? So look at the counter archive and look at the underground archive, and you will find a lot of surprises. There were a lot of women making film around those times. There were other filmmakers, and that was not the only city where film was happening in Colombia. And then the second thing that I see as a malady, and that's how decolonizing the archive is that in the effort of dialogue, we keep ignoring voices. And I am talking about Colombia, but I know that this could generate another conversation. We keep seeing the same people invited to the question and answers with the directors. We keep seeing the same person programming. We keep seeing the same men organizing the forum. And we still get panels on cinema after film festivals where there are 3 men that have been talking for 20, 15, 10 years. So I want to close by reminding you that there are a lot of women film critics in Latin America. In the case of Colombia, we have people such as Maria Fernanda Arias, Maria Luna, Carolina Sordis, Maria Elena Rueda. In addition to me, I think I'm kind of visible. It's just because I published a book on Colombian history. It's not because my scholarship is superior. But there is a whole digital Rolodex of scholars, and dialogue is about this. Yeah, I happen to know people that are often called, I love them, some of them are my very close friends, but decolonizing and decolonizing the archive, decolonizing the festival, and using the dialogue in another way also implies abandoning your safety blanket and thinking, who are the women that talk about cinema in your country? Who are the Afro-descendants that talk about cinema in your country? What's the native population that talks about? There is a very vibrant movement of indigenous communities in Colombia making cinema right now. And those voices need to be brought as specialists because they have been studying media. And the fact that they are not publishing in mainstream magazines or in the New York Times, it does not mean that their voice is not important. Or that they are not in Twitter.
Thank you. Tamara, do you want to say any closing words? I have to go introduce a film.
Yes, in the interest of time, I'm sorry, Hebe, I just want to say, because Diana has to go introduce a film, let's continue the conversation offline. These were very provocative questions, wonderful questions from the audience. I just suggested we actually create another panel on decolonizing the archive and the festival. Let's get our team back. Let's bring in more voices. Let's continue trying to change things. And I'm sorry, Hebe, do you want to just say really briefly, because we have to all say goodbye.
One of the things that I wanted to say is that I had the pleasure of working for the first time as part of the Cartagena Film Festival with a native Colombian indigenous programmer, Leky Uriana, whom I met also before in the School of Cinema in Cuba. But it was really my first experience in an international film festival. Sorry, my second, because I used to work at the LA Film Fest with Cedar Shepard, who's also Native American, and he was an associate programmer. But in terms of you know, a festival in South America, because I didn't see that even in Guadalajara, working actually with you know, as with a fellow programmer who was native indigenous on that country, and for that I really, you know, I was really happy about, you know, the incorporation, and especially in the case of Cartagena, of around 10 or 12 Colombian programmers who will be vetting on the films that us, the international consultants, will be submitting to the festival. So it was, I think, in that respect, a very revolutionary kind of idea, because the Colombian programmers make up of journalists and film critics, filmmakers, producers, etc., will have a say on actually what kind of films were going to be shown at the festival. And that didn't happen in other festivals anyway. But bringing about this fact of having you know, this diversity pool, especially in not in this only this festival, everywhere. Sorry, Tamara.
That's okay. That's okay, Hebe. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. We're starting to begin it. And thanks to everyone for your participation. Excellent work, panelists. Amazing. Thank you, audience. Let's stay in touch and have a great day. I won't say morning or night because of the time zones. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.